Welcome back to How China Works. I'm Brendan Davis, your co-host.
And I am Ying Li, your other host. I am actually staying with my family in my hometown Kaifeng, ready for the Chinese New Year in a week. How are you doing, Brendan?
I'm very excited for you. You get to eat all that yummy food for Chinese New Year. I am in lovely Los Angeles, and it has been treating me very well. Thank you. I'm good. I'm here working on my project, and we're doing our shows remotely, as we're going to do for a while. We have a really special guest who's also in California. Why don't you tell everybody who our guest is today?
Today, our special guest is Steve Hoffman, who actually is also known as Captain Hoff from San Francisco.
And you guys know each other from San Francisco, yeah?
Right. It's been a while. I remember the first time I went to hear one of his speech at Founder Space. And after speech, I went ahead to say hi. I still remember that curious look and that very friendly, curious look, but with great energy. We had a wonderful talk over there. That's the first impression.
Well, and it's interesting because I did not meet him through you or vice versa. I met him probably a year and a half before I met you. But he has been extremely generous with his time, both on my original podcast. I believe he was guest number 5 on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, if you can believe that. Episode 102 just went live as we were recording this today. But the nice thing about Steve is that he is not afraid to be real. And this was something you were talking about in terms of his authenticity.
Right. The biggest thing about Steve is he is not afraid of saying what he believes in, especially at this moment. He makes the perfect example or cross-cultural ambassador between US and China right now. That's probably why we bring him in today's talk, to really shine some great lights and great hope maybe for our audience. That's why we are very honored to have him here.
Absolutely. And so we're going to get into that interview here in just a second. Steve is the founder and CEO and captain, as they say, of Founder Space. And they are the world's largest global incubator that is in China. So they're big other places. They're from the Silicon Valley, but they are throughout China. And just in the few years that I've known him, it's been interesting to see him building this. And we're very excited to get into this. And he's going to share not only great strategies for both Chinese working outside of China with America, but vice versa, strategies and tactics with specific examples. It's really, really helpful. And let's get into it. Well, we are very happy to welcome back a friend of both of ours and a friend of my other podcast, a mentor and friend and colleague of Ying Ying's, Mr. Steve Hoffman. Steve, how are you today?
It's great to be with you. I'm doing well.
We're glad to have you. You and I are both on California time. Ying's back in Kaifeng on China time, which is an unusual mix for us. So if we could impose on you to please give us kind of the short introduction of yourself. You have actually such a varied resume, of course, and we know you, so it's a little hard to know where to start. How do you sort of describe yourself when you need to kind of give a fairly rounded general picture to someone in, say, 30 to 60 seconds? What do you sort of say?
I always start with, my name is Steve Hoffman, but in Silicon Valley, they call me Captain Hoff.
Nice.
They also call me Captain Hoff in China now, because I'm in China quite often. And I am the founder and chairman of Founder Space, which is a global incubator and accelerator. I'm also the author of the book, Make Elephants Fly, which is all about how to get your startup company off the ground.
I'm really happy to have you here. So we're going to go straight to our questions today. So our first question for you today is, right now, with all your experiences in China, so what do you believe are the most difficult tasks right now or challenges for American people right now to work with their Chinese partners in China when it comes to making a cross-border business success?
It is always hard to get started in China. And that is because China operates very differently than most Western countries. So when you go to China, don't expect to figure things out quickly. You may actually, when you go there, you'll actually think you figured it out very quickly, because on the surface, a lot of things make sense and seem familiar. But the deeper you go, the more layers you'll discover. Mm-hmm. And over time, you'll realize how little you actually knew at the beginning.
What would you say? How have you approached it? Let's maybe let you do an overview, because you have had obviously pretty great success over there. So what has been your strategy, and then also any specific tactics that have proven helpful for you in approaching both creating new relationships as well as maintaining and managing existing relationships with Chinese businesses and folks?
When I first went over there, I knew nothing about China. This was about 3.5 years ago, maybe a little more. And everything was novel to me. I had to figure out everything from scratch. I didn't speak Chinese. I went over there just to explore China and see if there was a possibility of doing business. The approach I took actually worked out quite well. We have done very well in China. We have expanded all across China. We have a presence in every major city, either through a partner or our own incubators and accelerators that we've launched. But how I got started was not by trying to do any big deals. And this is the mistake most Westerners make. Mm-hmm. They'll go over there with their business and they'll want to do some big deal, like for all across China, get something done fast, get it up and running. And the issue is that if you do a big deal and you don't know what you're doing, or you pick the wrong partner, then all of a sudden you'll have a big failure on your hand.
Right. And
so my strategy was,
the whole country.
You're done, right? You're done in the country, and you'll end up wasting a lot of money. You might have formed a joint venture, and then you're stuck with these partners, and unraveling that can be a nightmare, a real nightmare. So I took a very different approach because I knew I didn't know much. I decided to do lots of little agreements with lots of different partners in different cities. So we would do short-term, small relationships, like we'll do an event together, we'll do a project together, we'll do this, we'll do that. And each of those, then I could get to know them through the process and figure out how they did business, how business was done, whether I could trust them, what type of terms I could actually negotiate on a larger deal. Because when you're doing a smaller deal, you don't really know the boundaries of what what you could command in China for the type of services or products you offer. And so by doing these little deals for the first couple years, it really helped me to start to understand how business is done in China, and in particular, how we should proceed in China.
Kind of going back to my question, what do you believe are the most difficult tasks? The reason why I ask about this is there might be challenges when you are actually really building relationships, and because of cross-cultural differences, and there must be challenges when you are actually trying to maintain relationship, getting deals done. What do you believe are the challenges to prevent you to, in American way, to be successful in China? Basically, you have your expectation that came actually in some way from your culture, right? So how do you manage that expectation, and how do you face these sort of challenges?
In China, from my experience, China is a very layered society. And it's like Japan or Korea or these cultures that have been around a long time, and they've been very homogenous. All the people are similar. So everybody kind of learns how to interact with each other. As a foreigner, you're coming to China without that depth of knowledge. So the first thing you need to do is understand that what people say on the surface isn't necessarily what they're actually thinking or even intending to do. And you may miss the signals that Chinese to Chinese would be very obvious, right? How their tone of voice, how they phrase it, might indicate that they're intending to do something different than what they're saying. They're actually just being polite, or, it's something that they can't do, whatever it is. You'll miss these. So my advice to Westerners, Americans, or anybody else going to China is you cannot be Chinese, right? So as a Westerner, I can't be Chinese, and I definitely can't be Chinese overnight. When I first get there, if I'm only going to gain, I have to live there for years and years and years to start to really understand.
Chinese.
Yes, but what you can do is be very clear. So, and it's very important to over communicate, meaning you want to be very clear with what you want out of it, and you want to really understand and take the time to understand what they need out of the deal. You can only have a relationship ultimately that works if both parties win.
Sure.
And trying to get the very best deal possible shouldn't be your goal, right? Your goal should be trying to find the best partners possible for the long term, even if you have to give up some on what you could ultimately get out of the deal. So in our first rounds of negotiations and stuff, we commanded much less, settled for much less than we could get, let's say, 2 or 3 years out once we were into China and actually understood what we could do and how everything worked. But that should be part of the price you pay for the learning experience.
What are some of the things that, without obviously being into your specifics of things that are confidential, what would you say are maybe some of the most common sticking points in terms of things that you have to sort of be flexible with, if there is even a specific category? Because everything you're saying rings true to me across different dimensions. But is there anything specifically? I mean, I assume it's not typically, it's a matrix. It's not just price. It's not just duration. It's, what are some of the things that you run into over and over again?
Some of the things is to figure out as quickly as possible who you can and really want to work with, and also figure out as quickly as possible whether they can actually deliver on what they're saying and whether it's really a win for them. So you can waste a lot of time with the wrong people, and it can slow you down dramatically or even stall you out if you don't vet the different partners in the right way. As I said, we engaged a lot of partners on very small projects. By doing small projects, we could if one didn't work out, we might have 30 small projects going, but we might only expect half a dozen to actually yield results. So out of the 30, maybe 6 would actually come to fruition. And through that process, it would move very fast, and we could actually figure out, this partner really delivers. This partner really has government relationships. This partner really has the resources they say they have, and the follow through and everything else. And so my suggestion and what we did was kind of think of each one, make test cases where you can test out the different relationships and get to know them, and then see what results happen. And don't just do a few, do a lot.
So did
simultaneously.
You basically created, everyone's business or industry, of course, is going to have their own way that they would do this, but you created some sort of almost a standard, here's our introductory sort of engagement that we can just offer across, all these areas with all these people and do a one-off. And then you have that as sort of a control to see how they respond, how they follow through, what the timing is, and you can use that to help evaluate.
Yes. And we wouldn't commit to anything large until we could clearly see that it was the chances that it would work. Now, one of the frustrating things that you asked me, the things that kind of set us back and still sets us back, is a lot of times we will sign an agreement, have everything signed, we'll have a deadline in there for payments and everything else, and then something will change on the Chinese end, the government won't come through or another partner won't or whatever, happens, and then they kind of blow through the deadline.
Yeah. I've had that happen about 80% of the time.
Yes. And we're left with why did we even bother to sign this thing.
Exactly.
You're gonna, if it was a lot of work to negotiate an agreement. It takes a lot of time, and and you don't need, and then they can blow through it. So a lot of times, there's different levels of agreements. So when you go to China, everybody wants to sign like a quick MOU, just to say you're doing business. And those are fine. You want to make sure that it's non-binding and you're not locked into anything. And you should keep them like one page, or half a page. Keep them very simple, with no obligations. Mm-hmm. And then before you enter into signing a real agreement, you want to make sure they have the resources, mm-hmm. And it helps also to have things templatized. Like, mm-hmm. So we ended up templatizing our agreements for different activities, like if we run a course there, if we do all sorts of different things. So we don't have to spend a lot of time negotiating. We're just like, here is the agreement. And then we're pretty much like, take it or leave it, right. Because we don't want to waste a huge amount of time negotiating every detail when like 80% of the time, nothing will happen.
So with that being said, what actually makes a good partner in foreign counterparts' eyes? This is literally, if not a billion-dollar question, but a lot of our audience are very eager to know in Westerners' business partners' minds. So when they make friends or make partners and getting deals done in China, they definitely, a lot of them already know that they need specifically find a good partner. But what actually make them in some way, if not we say satisfied, or what is the expectation? What makes a great partner?
I can go through that. So
yeah.
What makes a great partner is a few different elements. First of all, I found it's so much easier if they speak English, especially since I don't speak Chinese.
Yeah, that helps.
And if I have to have an interpreter, we can still communicate, but it's very hard to get to know them.
Yeah.
Because you always have that interpreter between you. Unless you're sharing a common language, you just don't, and they're proficient enough in that language, that shared language, both parties. It's very hard to really get a feeling for who they are. And they can't get a feeling for who you are. And you can, and I've done deals. Some of our partners, the key people, they always have somebody in the company who speaks English, but some of the key people do not speak English.
Sure.
So we've still done deals with them. They've worked out, but I'm never as close to them. So it's not, I never get to the point of really knowing them.
Right.
So that's one thing. Other elements to finding a good partner include their ability to, can they deliver on their promises? Do they have the resources they say they have? Do they have the relationships? And in China, the relationships are so crucial. So everybody will tell you that they have all these relationships, but at the end of the day, certain people do and certain people don't.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme that this seems to be a recurring thing you're emphasizing, and I've emphasized it when I give somebody the hot take intro to China. We love our Chinese friends and colleagues, but this is like a really sincere cultural difference that we seem to run into is the having to do with the face and not wanting to say no. Do you interpret it that way sometimes, or do you interpret it that you sometimes run into people who are just over-promising?
Both. So some people, they just don't want to say no. Some people don't want to be embarrassed, right, that they don't have it. Some people truly want to believe they have a relationship, and they may know or can get the relationship, but they are actually unable to do that or deliver on it. So there are all these different elements that come in depending on the person. But what you care about is, just can they do it? Can they get it done? And, in China, not saying no is a big thing, which we deal with all the time. It used to frustrate me like crazy because I would we would be in negotiations with somebody, like going back and forth, and they're responding, and we're going back and forth, and then at a certain point they just stop.
Yep.
They don't tell you why they stop. They don't say, like in America, we may say, well, we can't do this term. Right. Or we don't have the money to afford you, or something else happened. Right. They just stop. And so you're like, well, why did you, and they don't want to say, they don't want to tell you.
It's like the like the ghosting, with as they say, when somebody just stops messaging you back on a text or a thread. It's like
and at first you're thinking, did I do something wrong? Did I insult them?
Well, Captain, we have How China Works Season 1 for the entire season. We try to decode the cross-cultural barriers, the conflicts, the barriers, and misunderstanding as much as possible, including one specific week we talk about decoding Chinese communication. There's a specific episode I highly recommend you to check it out. It's called Yes, No, and Please. Thank you. So Brandon had a great fun recording that with me, but we did actually find out a lot of interesting.
I have to listen to that.
We have this isn't meant as promo, because if somebody's listening to this, they already know the show, right? But we did design that for a season to be a real reference. So like in 10 to 12 minutes, people can get like a nugget of info they need on a given topic. But yeah, you never stop learning this stuff. I mean, and it seems like just when you sort of figure things out, I mean, the players change. Do you find that when you're dealing, I mean, of course, I guess you're dealing more with sort of principals as opposed to sort of mid-level folks, but do you find that the principals change at a frequency that also makes deals collapse because the key people are no longer there?
Yes. That can happen within companies because, a lot of companies have high turnover. So the key people you're talking to may move on. It happens all the time. And a lot of times it's not even the principals, the upper people. Usually they'll stay if it's a company. But a lot of times it's the person you're talking most to, the person who's actually the lower level or mid-level person who's actually getting everything done. The other one is there's a big turnover of government officials. So if you have the government involved in anything you're doing, whoop, they're off. It's a new government official. We're resetting.
Yes.
The past 6 months, didn't matter.
They got promoted. They got promoted or pushed.
Yeah, and they're, to battle corruption, they're moving government officials all the time, right? They keep them always changing, but that also creates a discontinuity when you're trying to get something done that's long term or a bigger project.
Are you seeing anything change in the time you've been there for long enough, and you've done enough deals, and you have continuity? Are you starting to see any changes in how, or does it seem like it's similar and that you just understand it better? Do you see an evolution on the China side of being more tending toward international norms? Is I guess what I'm trying to say.
It's hard to tell because my experience in China has been too short a time. Under 4 years. So I can't, if you've been there 10 years or 20 years, I'm sure you could see a big change. I've also been in that time learning about China. So I don't know if it's me becoming more proficient or them becoming more westernized.
I can really relate to that, Captain Hoff. I live in the States for over 4 years, and I still have plenty of new things to learn besides mastering the language. But I really think it's really important to look at future. For example, among all the people you engage with in China or outside of China, and of course, a lot of entrepreneurs, executives, even government officials. But let's say a specific group of Chinese young entrepreneurs or young professionals. I'm sure you have mentored a lot from the engagement that you have, and your book has really been read here everywhere. So what do you want them to learn most? For young Chinese entrepreneurs in the future, they have the responsibility actually to go global, to better engage with their Western partners, for them to understand a little bit better, or even build great projects together So what do you want them to learn most, and how, if there's any, that specifically the American founders or startup founders, entrepreneurs can learn from these Chinese peers in China?
Okay, so that's two questions. What can Chinese entrepreneurs learn to go global? Well, I think the best way to learn is to engage with a lot of Westerners. And then or listen to the podcast here, so people would understand how the cross-cultural communication, but really engaging in projects, having multicultural teams, I think is really important. So if I'm a Chinese entrepreneur, instead of just having all Chinese, if I can invite onto our team, even if they're not high level, low level or mid level, somebody into our company that works on the project with us, who is from Europe or from America or Australia or somewhere else, that is the best way. You don't learn just by reading a book. You have to learn by actually interacting with people. So that's number one. For Westerners to learn from Chinese entrepreneurs are great. I mean, they are pretty amazing. They're extremely hardworking, very driven. In general, Chinese execute very well when they have a plan, when they know what they're supposed to do and what the goal is. I would recommend to any Westerner who wants to do business, definitely in China, you cannot go to China without having and really succeed in China, especially if it involves distribution of products, consumer sales, business to business, without having Chinese on your team.
Right.
Having them as full team members and giving them full responsibility, not just they can do something, but they have to check with you every time. If they're just taking orders from you, then they will just wait for orders, because China is a very hierarchical society, and you won't get the real value out of them. You need to give them ownership over their job and allow them to actually do it the Chinese way. And then you can learn from how they're doing business. And the startups I see that succeed in China, they have Chinese key principals on the Chinese side who are given full authority to execute. And that authority is so important, because as a Western company and as a Westerner, you're never, ever in the amount of, unless you've lived there for decades, going to understand how to really do business in China at a level that is competitive with local Chinese companies.
Exactly. In terms of how to encourage the Americans to empower Chinese partners locally, what are some of the tips that you give them? I mean, besides as much of a crash course as possible, just on the what you've learned, are there any key things that you tell them to either pay much, extra attention to, or ways to motivate or direct or manage their Chinese colleagues in a way that empowers the Chinese colleague in a way, but also make sure that you achieve a mutually understood goal, because that could be the tricky part, is that you're not always, in my Hollywood language, you're not always making the same movie. So how do you ensure that you're making the same movie?
Yeah, it's true. It's very hard for anybody, whether you're Chinese doing business abroad or you're or you're Westerners doing business in China, and it goes both ways. So if you're Chinese, you better have Westerners on your team. Or at least Chinese nationals who have lived in the West and worked a long time. But both ways, you need to figure out, number one, you have to give up control. And if you're going to give somebody autonomy, if you're going to give somebody local in China or in the US, whoever you're hiring, the freedom to actually make decisions, that means you have to give up control, because they are going to be able to make those decisions without checking back with you. Right. So the most important thing is to set up a framework at the beginning for what types of decisions they are free to make without checking in on you, and what type of decisions they need approval on from the home office or from the core management team. Now, hopefully, you can give them enough freedom so that they can really execute. Because if all the really important decisions are still, they have to come back for approval, the problem is you might not have the understanding of why they need to make those decisions. So you may, when they come back to you for these approvals, there's a good chance you'll be making the wrong choice. So unless, of course, you really listen to them and really listen and value their opinion, which means you can't just hire anybody in China. You have to hire people who you can trust, number one, because they're going to be representing you there and running the business. And number two, who have the depth of knowledge and the ability to actually make really good decisions. And so you cannot spend too much time in the hiring process really figuring out who are the right people. You don't want to rush it, in other words, and just bring on the first person you meet who's nice. Because even though they're nice, it doesn't mean that they'll actually do a good job and that you can actually count on them and you can actually give them that autonomy. So it's my advice to, let's say, a Western company doing business in China is hire Chinese here who happen to be over here working in the US and bring them into your company, get to know them really well. And if they're really, once you've really worked with them for a while in the States, then you can deploy them to China, assuming they're willing to do that. You can deploy them there and they can be your spearhead, allowing you to enter the country with that trust relationship, with that knowledge, with the really understanding of what they can do. And then they can start to bring in more people and grow your business.
Great. I guess a wonderful question, wonderful suggestions. I guess great cross-cultural talents are much needed everywhere globally at this point, right?
Yes. So and unfortunately, we live in such a global world that the talent is everywhere. It's all around us.
Yeah, we just need to find them and listen to our podcast and be in our community, right?
Yes.
Brandon, are you still here?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna, Steve. I'm trying to WeChat her to say you can ask this question now, but I don't think we'll obviously we'll cut out her backstage. Yeah, Ying, would you like to follow up?
I have to
I know something I want to add at the end that's not on here.
Yeah, I have.
But I'll say it.
So,
it's a final.
Captain Hoff, some fun examples if you have when you're engaging with a group of Chinese friends or Chinese partners that literally show their merits, basically virtues, if you truly really appreciate that, if you have some great examples, and feel free to share with us.
So the most important thing I look for is actually the same thing I look for here in America. And that's people who have real integrity, people who really care about other people. They are not just in it for the money. They aren't just in it, to get something. They really want to do something with their life that is meaningful and that has a positive impact. And I can't tell you how important this is in the end, because their values as a person will end up informing all their decisions that they make. And I have been fortunate enough to meet some of the most amazing people in China, I've ever met, like including you, Ying, because
shy face.
The reason we originally became so close was because Ying really, really told me, and we had deep and long discussions about how she really wanted to have a positive impact in the world and what she cared about and what she was passionate about. And I came to know her and trust her like a sister, somebody like I could just completely trust with because I knew no matter what happens, like she's the type of person, she would always do the right thing and she would always try to be there for you. Now, that is what I look for. And I've found a surprising number of people over the past few years in China who I feel like they're kind of part of my family. They're people like if I was in trouble, I would call them, and they would be there for me. And that is the number one thing. That is it.
Well,
it's fundamentally about love and being loved, that share this kind of value cross culturally. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's truly about if you have the ability to love the other person wherever he or she is from, right? So we really need this kind of culture.
And those things shine through. They shine through all the culture. Like you just see it in their eyes. You just hear it in everything they say and how they approach the world and approach their life. And you see it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, there's somebody I really want to be around.
This is it's funny because this is you described how I feel about Yinging as well, Steve. So we'll just embarrass her twice. We'll embarrass you from northern and southern California simultaneously. But doing this show with Yinging has been mission. Doing this show with her has really it was a hope of mine to do something like this where we could have this cross-cultural dialogue and really get into some, into real things and not just do sort of the PR fluffy generic version of a chat. I mean, we really want to accomplish things is the goal. I mean, we'll see how well we do, but sort of to that end, I'm curious, what are you sort of working on? Are you working on anything specifically that's like U.S.-China cross-cultural engagement related? I mean, of course, your company's international, but is there anything that's sort of focused on U.S.-China relations, or is that sort of secondary? Is that just more of a structural aspect of how your business works?
Well, I feel like I'm sort of an ambassador to China because relationships are strained right now between the U.S. and China. At this same period of time, I have become relatively well known in the Chinese business community, especially amongst startup founders and that whole ecosystem. And I give a lot of talks across China. And so I am actually speaking as kind of a unifier to really help Chinese understand what most Americans feel. And when I come back to the U.S., I also give lectures trying to help Americans understand, how Chinese are. Right. And unfortunately, the media distorts this. Totally. And most Americans have no clue as to really what China is, what the culture is, anything about China. And right now, people are very fearful. There's a lot of negative energy going around.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that we don't fall prey to that, and that we go deeper, and we can see that countries and international relationships are very complex. There are many. There's the political aspects, the military aspects, the cultural aspects, the business aspects, the personal aspects. All these things intertwined, and the problem with the dialogue lately has been they oversimplify it, and then they focus on they pull out what information they want to make a certain point. Right. And therefore it becomes very distorted and very counterproductive to actually building a better world.
This is what I wanted to follow up on related to that, if I may, Yinging, is not that this will take care of you ever having to address these things again, of course, but and not to focus on the negative, but actually I'm curious, what are one or two or three of the things you're tired of having to explain to people about China? And you don't need to over-explain it now, but what are the things that you just hear so much that are just so wrong that you just wish people would, read a book or something or take a trip?
Yeah, take a trip. Actually meet some people.
Right. That's really the way to do it.
And engage with, number one, can you trust Chinese? In America, people are like, you can't trust them. And, we hear all these stories and everything else. Well, honestly, everywhere you go in the world, trust is a factor, right? When you do business or any sort of relationship. A lot of people in the U.S. you can't trust. I mean, look at Theranos and all these. Oh, gosh. These right. There's a lot of these. The same thing happens here that happens there. It goes beyond. It comes down at the end of the day to the individual, to individuals and their decision making. and you should not overgeneralize like that. So trust is number one. Fair play. Can you get a fair break in China? Now, a lot of the barriers to entering China are not artificially put in place by the government. Of course, there's some of that, and that can be negotiated in trade agreements and others. But a lot of them are just cultural, as you guys are addressing right now. Right. The cultures are so different that a lot of U.S. And foreign companies don't succeed in China because they don't really take the time or bring on the people who have that deep understanding of the culture and can figure it out.
True.
And let's see if there's a third.
Well, there are probably many.
The third one is that China wants to take over the world. There's a big fear in America, especially being promoted by Donald Trump and others, that China is out to take over the world. China is definitely a superpower, and America is a superpower, and there are always going to be frictions there between rival superpowers. But China has not demonstrated that they are out to conquer every country around them and dominate the world. They have really consistently been focused on China itself, and Chinese sovereignty and making their own decisions. So if you read a lot of history, which I do, Chinese are very sensitive about their own sovereignty because, there was this whole wave of colonialism,
invasion,
colonization, and all these things that China had to contend with, and they had to overcome. And that's ingrained in their history. Unlike America, we haven't, had like the Japanese land here and taken over most of the country, and we didn't have, all these cities taken away by European powers before that, and so we don't have that perspective, and so that without that historical perspective, a lot of times we don't understand why Chinese make the decisions they do.
Very nice.
That's why empathy actually becomes the biggest role here in better bridging the gaps in understanding the reality and fostering cooperation. So I truly appreciate that.
Sure. Yes. You have to go with empathy, an open mind, and an inquisitive mind, right? To actually ask questions and try to figure out, well, why are people saying it? Why do they have that point of view?
It's something that have been in my mind for quite a while, actually, because I'm Chinese. I travel and come back. I see many, when it comes to leadership and communication, right? When it comes to building relationships, there are many successful examples. Captain Hoff is definitely one of the successful ones. So do you see any other, or are there any Chinese version of Steve Hoffman that are well kind of received and, go to the West and make the same ambassador things? Do you know any? If yes,
I do.
Why? Yeah. And what make them successful? Yeah.
Well, one that most people would know of is Li Kai-fu. So he, with his new book that he wrote, AI Superpowers, and his presence in the media, he has really been an ambassador for China over here. He has been doing a lot of public speaking, and he has really connected with Americans.
Interesting, because they speak the language, and also Dr. Kai-fu Lee also have pretty much cross-cultural experience in his whole life, right? I think that's really made him pretty well-received cultural ambassador.
He has. So he has a couple abilities that have allowed him to traverse the cultures in a way that a lot of other Chinese haven't done. And that is he's fluent in English. He's from Taiwan originally. So he has that kind of cross-cultural experience. And he's a very, very good communicator.
Yeah.
So he's able to articulate situations very well. Another one is Ma Yun, or Jack Ma.
Yeah.
He has all those he has all those same qualities. And he also has, you ask the average American and there's a good chance they know of Jack Ma.
We have actually quoted him or name checked him probably more times than any single person other than Confucius on the season one of this, going through history and examples of how things should work and do work.
Those are the two best known ambassadors in kind of business and technology, the area that I'm in. But there are others, and I think we'll see a lot more because there's so many young Chinese now who have been educated in the United States and in Europe, who are fluent in English, who understand both cultures, and are going to be going back and forth a lot.
You just mentioned the Chinese who have studied abroad and worked abroad, meaning so here or in Europe, and now they're going to go back to China. What are you sort of looking how are you looking at that situation? What do you see as some of the knock-on benefits of that? Besides, obviously, it's increasing understanding, but are you starting to see results of that? Are you seeing some of those younger people, who studied abroad, kind of when you go to China and you meet kind of the entry or mid-level people?
I meet young people who've studied abroad all the time. I mean, every time I go there, they're the ones I'm always working with because a lot of the older generation, a lot of times won't speak English well or even at all. So they have that younger generation are the ones we end up engaging with. And also, most of the startup founders are young and a huge percentage of them have studied abroad. I'm just constantly interacting and it feels very natural. It feels, we have no trouble communicating on any level. They have a deep understanding, the ones who studied in the US especially, for how Americans think. And it's a lot of fun.
Wow.
So all I could say is, that younger generation that has studied abroad is the gateway to China. And right now it's such a dynamic part of the Chinese economy that it makes it much easier than it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago to actually enter China, find people you relate to, engage them, and start doing business.
That's amazing. I see a lot of golden returnees and a lot of interesting overseas student association are making bigger engagement here in China, and also they're taking more responsibility in today's cross-cultural relationship with the world.
Yes.
So, Steve, as we're kind of landing the plane here, I'm wondering, what are you looking at in terms of as things evolve? Wouldn't ask you to have too much of a geopolitical crystal ball, of course. That's not fair to anybody. But as, relations are evolving and whatnot, how do you see the next, short to medium term, 3 to 5 years of Chinese business and the opening and the cooperation? How do you see that developing? What's kind of your best case, and what do you think is the most realistic, future we have here?
In the short term, it's going to be strained because, unfortunately, because of the political situation and sort of the tenor that has taken up this more combative way of approaching international relations, America first and things like that. That is going to make it a little more difficult to, especially for Chinese entrepreneurs companies coming to do business in the US. It's become a lot harder, especially if they're a technology company. It's really hard right now. For Americans going to China, it's not as bad. China is still pretty open and embracing to foreign companies in a lot of ways. And it's definitely each year it's becoming easier. Another downside is the economy in China. It's a difficult time right now, and we don't know when that's going to end. We don't know if it's going to get worse over the next few years or it will kind of bounce back. There's so many factors. It's so many variables that nobody really understands what will happen. But I can tell you, in the long run, China has 1.4 billion people. It has an amazing level of education now and educated people. It has a robust economy. It is going to be one of the engines, China and the United States, driving the world. And if you start doing business in China now and you're willing to stick with it, you will reap the dividends in the long run. It might be, who knows in the short run? It could be, depends on your business, depends on all these other factors I've been mentioning. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, the opportunity in China is enormous. And I would encourage people that are interested in cross-cultural business and communication and things like that. You can't ignore China. I mean, there are two major markets in the world, and China is poised to become the biggest market in the world for all products with its 1.4 billion people. To engage with China now, it will be very valuable moving forward.
Well, Captain Hoff couldn't have said it better. All my friends with young kids, I tell them, teach them Mandarin, get them started, yes. get them started now.
Yes.
From my end, thank you so much. I know Ying would love to say a few things.
Thank you so much. You made a wonderful speaker here, Captain Hoff. We're looking forward to more interesting cross-cultural talk with you.
That would be wonderful. I'd love to have more talk with you guys. It's been great.
Wow, that was such a fun interview. Ying, what did you think?
Exactly. And one thing he demonstrates so well, actually, is the quote have been lingering in my mind for so long time, which is communication is really about leadership. And leadership is always about having the courage. Like Hoffman has done a lot, but more specifically on our show, he really exemplify it.
Absolutely, and we know so much about him because we know him a bit off of this show that we've seen this time and again. That was such a good interview from my point of view, and I think your point of view, that combined with the fact that we have the Chinese New Year, and I have some travel here in the States, we're both going to eat Mama's cooking in different countries. We are going to take a little break for Chinese New Year, and we're going to be back with new shows, more shows, about mid-February. But we're going to leave this one with Steve Hoffman, and also, of course, there's Carrie Brown's, and there's all of season 1. So, folks, please check it out. Find a show that you haven't listened to. If there's an episode that you want to revisit, share, contact us. I'll still be checking emails. Ian will still check emails. But until then, enjoy Chinese New Year, or enjoy early February.
Mom's dumplings.
Yeah, Mom's dumplings, if you get Mom's dumplings. And I will see you, Ying and I will see you on How China Works.
Again.